At about 7 in the morning on August 17th, 1915, in a grove of trees 2 miles east of Marietta, Georgia, about 25 men hanged a 31-year-old factory superintendent named Leo Frank from a branch. They had taken him out of a state prison 150 miles away the night before. They cut the telephone wires, drained the gasoline out of the prison's cars, handcuffed the warden, and drove Frank back through the dark in 8 automobiles, while men in the towns along the road telephoned ahead to say they were coming. They turned his body so that it faced the direction of the house where a 13-year-old girl named Mary Phagan had lived. Everyone in Marietta knew who they were, and 85 years later, historians finally published the list. A former governor of Georgia, the man who used to be mayor, and the man who is mayor now. A judge, off the bench then and back on it 2 years later. Several sheriffs, current and former. A grand jury was convened in Cobb County to find the lynchers, and it is possible that some of the lynchers sat on it. No one was ever charged. Leo Max Frank was born in Cuero, Texas, in April of 1884, and his family moved to Brooklyn when he was 3 months old, so he grew up a New Yorker in every way that mattered. He took a mechanical engineering degree at Cornell in 1906. His uncle, Moses Frank, was a major shareholder in the National Pencil Company in Atlanta, and asked Leo to come south and take a job there. Leo spent 9 months apprenticing at a pencil works in Germany, and by September of 1908, he was superintendent, 24 years old, on $180 a month, plus a share of the profits. In 1910, he married Lucille Selig, whose family had helped found the first synagogue in Atlanta, and in 1912, he was elected president of the city's B'nai B'rith chapter. He was a slight, precise, bookish man in thick spectacles, a northerner and a Jew in a city that was neither, running a factory floor full of Georgia farm girls. Mary Phagan was born on June 1st, 1899, to tenant farmers. Her father died before she was born. She left school at 10 to work part-time in a textile mill, and in the spring of 1912, she took a job at the National Pencil Company, running a knurling machine, the device that seats the rubber eraser into the metal tip of a pencil. She was paid 10 cents an hour for 55 hours a week, and her machine sat across the hallway from Leo Frank's office. On April 21st, 1913, the factory ran short of metal and laid her off. 5 days later, on Saturday, April 26th, Confederate Memorial Day, with a parade forming downtown, she rode the trolley into Atlanta to collect the pay she was still owed. She went up to Frank's office a little after noon, and he handed her an envelope with $1.20 in it. He was the last person to admit having seen her alive. Shortly before 3 the next morning, the night watchman, a black man named Newt Lee, went down to the factory basement and found her body near the incinerator at the back. She had been strangled with a length of cord. Atlanta went out of its mind. The city's papers put out 40 extra editions in a single day, and between them posted $1,800 in reward money. In the rubbish beside the body were 2 notes, written on scrap office paper in a semi-literate hand, pretending to be the dying words of the girl herself, and blaming a tall black man who worked in the building. One of them spelled night watchman as night witch. When the police read them aloud, Newt Lee said, "Boss, it looks like they are trying to lay it on me." and they arrested him that morning. They arrested Leo Frank 2 days later, on the day of Mary Phagan's funeral, with the city at a rolling boil. On May 1st, they arrested the factory's janitor, Jim Conley, who had been seen washing red stains out of a work shirt. Detectives examined it, decided the stains were rust, the way Conley said they were, and gave it back to him. Conley claimed he could not read or write. It turned out he could do both, and his spelling looked a great deal like the spelling in the notes. Over the following weeks, he gave the police at least 4 sworn statements, and each one contradicted the one before. First, he had spent the day in saloons. Then he had written the notes. But on Friday, the day before the murder, then it was Saturday, and Frank had dictated them. Then, after a 4-hour interrogation, Frank had killed the girl, and Conley had helped him carry her down to the basement in the elevator. The Solicitor General, Hugh Dorsey, put Conley in seclusion for 6 weeks and built his entire case on him. The trial opened on July 28, 1913, in the old City Hall building in Atlanta, before Judge Leonard Roane. Dorsey had lost 2 high-profile murder cases in a row, and one Georgia paper wrote that another defeat would have been, in all likelihood, the end of Mr. Dorsey as solicitor. Frank had 8 lawyers, led by Luther Rosser and Reuben Arnold. Hundreds of spectators packed the room, and a crowd stood outside at the open windows all day, close enough that the jury could hear it. They cheered Dorsey in and out every morning and evening. Jim Conley was on the stand for 3 days. The defense cross-examined him for 16 hours and could not shake him. Dorsey also brought in a procession of former employees and asked each the same question. Did they know Mr. Frank's character for lasciviousness? And one after another, they answered that it was bad. The judge let it in. By the end, Roane and the defense had a private arrangement. Neither Frank nor his attorneys would be in the courtroom when the verdict was read, because if the jury acquitted him, nobody in that building believed he would leave it alive. On August 25th, after less than 4 hours, the jury convicted him. Outside, according to the Constitution, 3 muscular men swung Dorsey onto their shoulders and passed him over the heads of the crowd across the street to his office, hat raised, tears coursing down his cheeks. The next day, Roane sentenced Frank to hang. 2 months later, denying the motion for a new trial, he said this from the bench: "I have thought about this case more than any other I have ever tried. With all the thought I have put on this case, I am not thoroughly convinced that Frank is guilty or innocent. But I do not have to be convinced. The jury was convinced. There is no room to doubt that." Georgia law at the time allowed a death sentence to be appealed only on errors of law, not on a rereading of the evidence. So Frank's lawyers filed 115 procedural objections and went up the ladder. The Georgia Supreme Court denied a new trial 4-2. The Supreme Court of the United States denied his appeal 7-2 in April of 1915, on the ground that he had raised his objection too late. Oliver Wendell Holmes and Charles Evans Hughes dissented, and Holmes wrote a sentence that has outlived almost everything else about the case. Mob law does not become due process of law by securing the assent of a terrorized jury. While the appeals ground on, a former congressman and twice a populist candidate for president, Tom Watson, began writing about Leo Frank in his newspaper the Jeffersonian. Watson had once been a populist who called for black and white farmers to make common cause, and he had turned into something else entirely. He called Frank a filthy, perverted Jew of New York. After the commutation, he dropped the last of the restraint and wrote plainly that lynch law is a good sign. It shows that a sense of justice lives among the people. Days before the lynching party formed, he told his readers that Georgians were being put on notice that our laws, our juries, and our judges have no jurisdiction over a Jew who can command money. It worked. The Jeffersonian circulation went from 25,000 in 1914 to 87,000 by September of 1915. Outside Georgia, the case ran the other way. Northern editorial pages demanded a new trial, and petitions on Frank's behalf gathered over 1 million signatures. Watson used that too. Every telegram from New York was more proof that rich Jews were buying a Georgia verdict. And the more the North objected, the more Georgia dug in. In June of 1915, with the execution set, the decision landed on Governor John Slaton, whose own term had days left to run. Watson sent word that if Slaton let Frank hang, he would make him a United States Senator and the master of Georgia politics for 20 years. Slaton got more than 1,000 death threats. He read over 10,000 pages of the record and went to the factory himself. And the thing that undid the state's case for him was the elevator. Conley had testified that on the morning of the murder, he relieved himself at the bottom of the elevator shaft, and then, hours later, rode that same elevator down with the body. But when detectives climbed down the ladder at 3 the next morning, they found what Conley had left there sitting undisturbed. Only afterward, when they ran the elevator down, did it strike the pile and mash it. Slaton rode that elevator to the bottom himself, twice, to be sure it could not stop short. It had not made the trip Conley described. It could not have. There was more. A state biologist had said the hair found on a lathe on Frank's floor was not Mary Phagan's. And Slaton noted that a head wound like hers bleeds freely, yet no blood was found at the lathe, in the elevator, or on the stairs. And a handwriting expert pointed out what nobody had noticed in 2 years of litigation. The notes were written in the third person instead of the first, the mistake a sweeper forging a dead girl's voice would make, and a Cornell engineer would not. On June 21, 1915, Slaton commuted the sentence to life. He told reporters that afternoon, "Feeling as I do about this case, I would be a murderer if I allowed that man to hang. I would rather be plowing in a field than to feel for the rest of my life that I had that man's blood on my hands." He told the same reporters he was certain Conley was the actual murderer, and told friends he would have granted a full pardon outright, holding back only because he expected the truth to come out on its own. A mob went to the governor's mansion, and the National Guard turned it back. When his term ended, the police walked John Slaton to the railroad station, and he and his wife left the state and did not come back for 10 years. Frank had been moved in the middle of the night, before the commutation was even announced, to the state prison farm at Milledgeville, 150 miles from Marietta, over mostly unpaved road. In July, another inmate named William Crean cut Frank's throat with a butcher knife, severing his jugular vein. Crean said he was certain the state would pardon him for it. Frank survived and was still bandaged a month later. The men who took him called themselves the Vigilance Committee, and they organized the way you would organize a public works project. An electrician to cut the wires, mechanics to keep the cars running, a locksmith, a telephone man, a medic, a hangman, and a lay preacher. 8 cars left Marietta separately on the afternoon of August 16th, reached the prison around 10 at night, and were back 7 hours later at a grove by a gin house where a former sheriff named William Frey had supplied the rope and the table. By mid-morning, people were arriving on foot, in cars, and on horseback to look at the body, and souvenir hunters cut pieces out of his shirt sleeves. Newt Morris, who had been part of the mob, called for a vote on whether to return the body to the family intact. One man voted no, and stamped on Frank's face and chest anyway, until Morris got the body into a basket and drove it out of town. Photographs of the hanging were sold in local stores as postcards for 25 cents, along with pieces of the rope, branches off the tree, and Frank's nightshirt. They moved so fast that the police announced sellers would need a city license. In Atlanta, 15,000 people filed past his body after the crowd broke the undertaker's window glass to get in. The new governor offered a $1,500 reward. The Macon Telegraph summed up the odds. Doubtless they can be apprehended. Doubtful they will. Leo Frank was buried at Mount Carmel Cemetery in Queens on August 20th, 1915. By some accounts, as much as half of Georgia's Jewish population left the state, and the ones who stayed spent the next 50 years making themselves smaller. 3 months later, on Thanksgiving night, a group of men climbed Stone Mountain and burned a cross to inaugurate a new Ku Klux Klan, and some of them had been at Frey's gin house in August. Tom Watson was elected to the United States Senate in 1920. When he died 2 years after that, the most conspicuous thing at his funeral was an 8-foot cross of flowers sent by the Klan. In 1982, an 83-year-old man named Alonzo Mann, who had been Leo Frank's office boy in 1913, said publicly that he had walked in on Jim Conley alone, carrying Mary Phagan's body toward the basement, that Conley had told him he would kill him if he ever said so, and that his mother had told him to keep quiet. He passed a polygraph. The pardon board turned Frank down anyway, on the grounds that innocence had to be shown conclusively. The Atlanta Constitution's editorial the next morning began, "Leo Frank has been lynched a second time." They tried again on narrower ground, and in 1986, the state granted a pardon, not for the murder, but for what Georgia did afterward. It recognizes, in its own words, the state's failure to protect the person of Leo M. Frank, and the state's failure to bring his killers to justice. It says nothing at all about whether he did it. Historians today are close to unanimous that he did not, but the conviction has never been vacated. Georgia has pardoned Leo Frank for being murdered. It has never gotten around to the other thing.